We are recording. Hello, how is everybody doing? I hope well. Are you ready for another fantastic week of world civilizations? I hope so. As I go around the globe to different times and different eras and try to showcase as many as important areas of history, no matter what the location, right? Because it is world civilizations, okay? So this week we're going to talk about the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and that's where we get a lot of advanced ideas coming into the West. Okay, we come out of a darker period, which they call the Middle Ages. All right. So let me go to the usual routine, share the screen, go to the material. Okay, I got to get myself out of here first. Oh, here we go. Start slideshow from the beginning. Oops, went too far. Go back, previous. Okay, again, world civilizations, right? Here to enjoy. And this should be for, as I look to my trusty calendar, May 24th. Okay, May 24th. Take this down a bit. All right, scientific revolution and its enlightened aftermath. Enlightened means you now have wisdom. You know something that you didn't know before. Okay. So, and aftermath means the result of some kind of situation. Okay. Some kind of situation. What is the aftermath? Okay. Yes. Okay. Perhaps the most far-reaching, so that means longest type of influence of all the revolutions since the introduction of agriculture in the Neolithic age was the early modern era's change in educated people's thinking about natural phenomena being things that happen, and sometimes things out of our control. So the natural phenomena, their laws, and their relation to a presumed creator. That's fancy words for God. This scientific revolution became fully evident in the work of the 18th century philosophers, but its major outlines were drawn earlier, when the focus of European intellectual work gradually shifted away or moved away from theology, which is the study of the Bible, to the mathematical and empirical sciences. By the end of the 18th century, it had proceeded so far among the educated classes that a new worldview was taken for granted. One that seriously changed the medieval conviction. Conviction is what you believe, so your belief that an omniscient God, which means an all-knowing God, ordained and guided the natural processes, which mean all the lives of human beings, including the life and in eternal fate of mankind. So, you know, fancy words for heaven and hell, basically. Okay, we got that? All right. While the, I'm sorry, the, where Why did my eyes slip? The consolidation of royal absolutism seemed to be rigorously proceeding in most of Europe. So royal absolutism means kings and queens, right? It was just we believe in it and there's no question about it. That's it. That means to be absolute. So again, rigorously proceeding, which means strongly continuing in most of Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries. The sciences successfully undermined traditional theology's claims. So undermine means go against these traditional religious claims. And by doing so, countered the royal throne or king and queens aspirations or goals for acceptance as God's chosen representative on earth, because many kings and queens said God chose us and you don't have a choice in this matter, right? That's all there is to it. Okay, sidebar 1543, Nicholas Copernicus, revolution of the heavenly bodies. These are highlights of major things that happened during this time. 1575 to 1650, Francis Bacon, Galileo, Galilei, Rene Descartes, famous peoples in science and philosophy. 1687, Isaac Newton, Principia Mathematica, his book, Law of Gravitation. 1690, John Locke, Essay Concerning Human Understanding. 1730s to 1789, Enlightenment flourishes, or it's at its peak. 1776, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. So you're going to see, we're going to throw a little bit of the US in there too. A lot of people don't do that. They deal specifically with Europe. So I'm at the bottom of 407. So that means I have to at least ask one question. So let's go there. Okay, pencil. Okay, question one. So obvious question here, easy as pie. Okay, there you go. When did the scientific revolution become fully evident? And with this wording, it's straight out of the reading, so that way you can easily catch the answer, you can find it, okay? That looks good as a Tuesday, so let me give you some time to answer that. Okay, let me get the eraser. Again, repeating, when did the scientific revolution become fully evident or fully aware? Okay, that's done. Okay, back to the material. So we finished down here on Earth. That was 407. So let me proceed to 408 for Wani and Nia. The scientific revolution of the 17th century. So great were the achievements during this epoch that one of the outstanding modern philosophers said that the 2 centuries that follow, to the next 200 years, have been living upon the accumulated capital of ideas provided for them by the genius of the 17th century. Wow. So in other words, that's kind of rude. It's saying that the next 200 years didn't really contribute anything at all. They were just living off the wonderful 17th century's innovations, let's say. The natural sciences, that is, those based primarily on observed phenomenon of nature, experienced a huge upswing, so they became much more popular in importance and accuracy. A new style of examining phenomena, or again, things that happen, the scientific method, came into common usage. It was composed of 2 elements: careful observation and systematic experimentation based on that observation. Interpretation of the results of the experiments, largely relying on mathematical measurement, was then employed or used to achieve new and verified or proven knowledge. The most significant advances in the sciences came from posing new types of questions rather than from collecting new facts. So look at that, new questions instead of collecting new facts. Very different. Different questions led directly to novel avenues of investigation, and those led to new data being observed and experimented with. For example, René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, one of the founders of the mathematical style of investigation, wished to take humanity to a higher plane of perfection than ever yet achieved. To do so, he separated the material from the non-material universe completely, insisting that the material world could be comprehended by mathematical formulas that existed entirely apart from the human mind. So thinking. If that was so, knowledge of these broad laws of number and quantity could provide explanations. Hetero lacking, which means before now lacking, of observed phenomena. The proper way to understand the material world then, and that's the world that we live in, we're not talking about heaven or hell or a spiritual frame, was to formulate broad generalizations of a quantitative nature and employ them to explain specific events or processes. This approach, in which one went from a general law to a particular example of that law observed by the human mind, was called deductive reasoning. So you deduce something, right? If I go to the kitchen and I know I left cake there and the cake is gone, and on your face, you have a bunch of frosting and crumbs on your shirt, I can deduce that you ate the cake, right? Another method of accumulating knowledge about the natural world was exemplified or shown in the writings of Englishman Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626. Bacon insisted that contrary to traditional belief, most ideas and principles that explain nature had not yet been discovered or developed, but lay buried like so many gems under the earth, awaiting discovery. Like Descartes, he looked forward to a better, more completely understood world. But this world was to be created through persistent and careful observation of phenomena without any preconceived laws or general explanations of them. A process that became known as inductive reasoning. Bacon was not methodical, which means he was not a really step-by-step in his science or his reasoning. His close association with the concept of inductive reasoning, which we just spoke about right here. Where's my arrow? Is perhaps not really deserved, but his writings did encourage later scientists to practice the empirical method of gathering data and then forming, shall we continue? Generalizations. Okay. Empirical means the evidence obtained by observation through the 5 senses, which is then worked up into varying hypotheses, which mean assumptions that may be subjected to experiments. So remember this. It's important. Maybe, not always. This style of assembling facts and verifying knowledge blossomed or grew in the 17th century and later became a foundation of the sciences. Now we have background of the scientific revolution. Why did the spectacular advances in natural science occur or happen in the 17th century rather than earlier or later? Why did they happen at this particular time? There is no single answer to this question. As with most important changes in the status quo of human knowledge, several factors came together at that time to encourage more rapid progress than before. But this is not to say that no progress had been underway previously. It is now accepted that the old view of medieval science as a laughable collection of superstitions and crackpot experiments is quite wrong. The medieval universities harbored many people who seriously undertook to widen the horizons of knowledge and had some success in doing so. The real problem of medieval and Renaissance science seems to have been not its superstitions, but its exaggerated reliance on authority rather than evidence, right? We're kind of going through a phase like that right now. People want to, a situation happens, we don't have all the truth, but people want to jump and get excited and yell and accuse people of things. And as long as enough people do that, they don't really care about finding out the truth. And that's very unsafe, especially to the person that's being accused of doing something bad. The great Greek philosophers of science, Aristotle, Ptolemy, Galen, Eratosthenes, and Archimedes were held in excessive reverence, which means almost like too much respect, as the givers of final truth. The weakening of this reverence was a precursor, or something that came before, of the breakthroughs of the 16th and 17th centuries. Stimulated and aided by the reports of the explorers and voyagers in the New World, scholars accumulated a mass of evidence about nature and geography that both amplified, which means increased, and then contradicted or went against some of what the traditional authorities had taught. Such evidence could be ignored only at the risk of retarding the power and wealth of the whole exploring society. Still more important, perhaps, was the rapid advance in the mathematical capabilities of Europeans. At the beginning of the 16th century, European math was still at the same level as in the 17th century. Only with the recovery of the Greek and Hellenistic mathematical works could it advance into new areas, specifically logarithms, calculus, and decimals. By the mid-17th century, math had become as much a device for theoretical exploration as for counting. Interesting. Another mass of data that partly contradicted what the Greeks had believed was the product of new instruments. So what are these new instruments? We need to know. The new math made possible analyses of the physical world that had never before been attempted. Instruments of all sorts, sensitive scales, pressure gauges, microscopes. That's an easy one to remember. Telescopes, thermometers, chronometers came along one after the other to assist in this analysis. It was now possible in the world to measure, weigh, divide, and synthesize the world in ways that explain the previously inexplicable, right? Sir. Okay, so that brings me to the bottom, 182,408. So, you know, it's back to question time. Whiteboard. That's all. Okay, question 2. Sorry about that. I wrote the wrong word. I had to pay attention. I think I need Starbucks. Okay, let me see if I can extend this a little bit. Stretchy poo. Okay, looks good as a twosie. Describe the two elements the scientific method was composed of. So that's pretty easy to find with the wordage that I used here. Okay. All right, question 3. Okay, I can probably stretch this out to a onesie. Yay. Okay, name some new instruments from this time. Remember, these instruments help people use their science and their measuring and what have you. So let me give you a few to answer that. Are you guys doing okay? I hope so. All right, let me go for that eraser. Okay, repeating, describe the two elements that the scientific method was composed of. It's easy to find with my wording. 3, name some new instruments from this time. Already self-explanatory. All right. Back to the new share. Material. So we ended up here on the bottom, inexplicable. We shall proceed to page 409. Okay. The progress of scientific knowledge, Copernicus and Newton. The rediscovery of the Greco-Roman scientific treatises by the Renaissance scholars from Arabic translations of Greek and Latin originals stimulated curiosity while providing a series of new insights into the makeup of the natural world. Insights that contradicted the conventional wisdom of the day. This progress was sharply interrupted by the wars of religion in the 16th century, when the focus shifted away from science to clashing theologies, which means religions that fought each other or didn't agree on issues. Only with the exhaustion of these religious antipathies after the 30 Years' War did scientific endeavors once again take a primordial position in educated men's life. This means basic basis and position in their lives, right? Where before it's like, either I believe in religion or I believe in science. Our emphasis on 17th century events does not mean that the modern science commenced then or started then. The acknowledged breakthrough in empirical knowledge, again, empirical, 5 senses, of the natural world came a century earlier with the revolution of the heavenly bodies. The pioneering treatise, or we can just call it a book, on astronomy by Polish scholar Nicholas Copernicus, 1473 to 1543. Copernicus cast severe doubt on the traditional and generally accepted theory of an Earth-centered, geocentric, you don't have to know that, universe. Remember, he used to say everything revolved, all the planets revolved around the Earth. That's what the church was saying, which he criticized as unnaturally complex and difficult to understand. Again, before him, nobody really asked questions of the church, Catholic Church. Copernicus' observations led him to conclude that the Earth revolved around a fixed sun, a belief first advanced by Hellenistic Greek astronomers. A cautious and devout Catholic, so he was still remaining a Catholic, Copernicus published his conclusions only in the year of his death. The church ignored his theory at first, although both Luther and Calvin ridiculed it or made fun of it. But when heliocentrism began to win adherents or believers in large numbers, both Rome and the Protestants officially condemned it as contrary to both scripture and common sense. Wow. It's one thing to be, a Protestant or a Catholic and say, I'm sorry, you're going against our Bible. We don't believe you. But then also common sense. Excuse me. Two astronomer mathematicians who emerged a generation after Copernicus also deserve our attention. The first was an eccentric Dane, which means Danish person, Tycho Brahe, 1546 to 1601, who spent much of his life taking endless, precise measurements of the cosmic rotation of the visible planets. Using these data, the German Johannes Kepler, 1571 through 1630, went on to formulate the 3 laws of celestial mechanics. which showed that the heavenly bodies moved in great ellipses or ovals around the sun rather than in the perfect circles that had been believed necessary as the handiwork of a perfect creator, or in other words, what the Catholic Church was telling you about God. This insight explained what had previously been inexplicable and made Copernicus' proposals still more persuasive. Okay. In the early 1600s, an Italian professor at Pisa named Galileo Galilei, 1564 to 1642, used his improvement of the telescope to rewrite the rules of cosmology as handed down from the ancients or ancient peoples. His discovery strongly supported Copernicus's suppositions that the universe was sun-centered. Right, so we are sun-centered, and that the Earth was a relatively small, insignificant planet in a huge solar system. Not only did Galileo's astronomy force clerical authorities, which means people in power in the church, to a reconsideration of the condemned theory of Copernicus, but his physics contributed to the final overthrow of Aristotle's long reign as a master physicist. Through his work with falling bodies and the laws of motion, Galileo came close to discovering the fundamental law of all nature, the law of gravity. So just to let you know, hint, connect these two, Galileo name with the law of gravity. That's an easy point for you. When Galileo died in 1642, the whole traditional view of the physical universe as an impenetrable mystery. Impenetrable means that you cannot solve the mystery. You cannot finally understand it. Created by God for his own reasons and not responsive to human inquiries or questions, was becoming to come apart. So in other words, people started questioning and getting some answers where before the Catholic Church said, don't ask questions and we're not going to give you any answers. Okay. The limiting horizons to human knowledge and understanding that had been in place for many centuries was steadily receding or going back as the 17th century progressed. What was still needed was some overarching explanation of the physical world order. The genius of Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, put the capstone of the new science in place. While still a student at Cambridge University, he theorized that there must be a master key to the edifice of the universe. In the century and a quarter since Copernicus, a great deal had been discovered or strongly indicated or shown about the laws of nature. Still lacking, however, was a universally applicable explanation of the most basic property of matter, which is motion. Okay. In the 1660s, Newton occupied himself with the study of physics. Very difficult subject. I cannot deal with it. Makes me angry. At the time, he evolved his deceptively or tricky, simple-looking theorem. Remember, mathematics and physics had two theorems. The most famous in the history of the world, E equals m squared. What is that? See, I don't even know this term, divided by d squared. This was the formula of the law of gravitation or gravity. Although it has yet lacked mathematical proof. So they haven't proven it yet, but it looked pretty good, pretty sturdy. After many more years of research, Newton published his conclusions and their proofs in the Principia Mathematica, which I said was a book, in 1687. The Principia was the most influential book on science in the 17th century and was soon known from one end of an educated Europe to another. See the Science and Technology box for more on Newton. Newton proposed or theorized a new universe. The physical cosmos was a sort of gigantic clockwork in which every part played a particular role and every movement and change was explained by the operation of impersonal physical laws. It was humans' proud duty and privilege to identify those laws, and in so doing, to penetrate the heart of the universe. Okay, interesting stuff there. Humans' proud duty and privilege to identify those. Now we get into religion and science in the 17th century. They don't always go hand in hand here, as you see. How did the official churches react to this challenge to tradition to themselves? Both Catholic and Protestant preachers or priests felt that regulating Earth to a secondary dependent position in the universe was at least an implied rejection of Holy Scripture. Here's an example. The Old Testament story about the sun standing still at the Battle of Jericho, for example. It also downgraded the jewel of God's creation, human beings, who lived on this inferior earth and were presumably limited to it. Catholic Galileo was threatened with imprisonment if he did not retract parts of what he had published in one of his books on science. He spent his final years under house arrest by order of the Pope. So house arrest, okay, what that means, you don't go to jail. You don't go to prison. Your jail is your home, right? So I guess they had some kinds of army guards outside his house, and they made sure that he did not leave it. If he had a wife or friends or family, I guess they went out and brought him food, right? So just imagine then too, there's no television, there's no radio, there's no internet, right? So how did this guy not go crazy, right? I mean, I mentioned to you once when I got a friend and he works and then basically stays home, and he works at nighttime on graveyard shift. So he doesn't have to deal with people because nobody's awake at the building at that time. But at least he can come home to his cable television and 200 channels. And if he wants to go on the internet, but Galileo had to stay home. So that was better than being in prison. But without different kinds of entertainment, I'm sure you're going to go into madness. We have some of our wilder famous people that have been put under house arrest. For example, what was her name? Gosh, the crazy actress. She was a singer and then an actress. And they didn't need police outside of her house. What they do in the modern times is they put a computerized bracelet around your ankle. And it's set for, I guess, your door. So if you get outside of your home, it sends an alarm to the police and the police show up. So there's still such thing as house arrest to this day, just to let you know, right? Okay, so we're at the bottom of 409. So it's question time. Okay, question 4. Now I'm doing a long one here, but that means your answer's short. So I do most of the work here. Okay. Let me see if I can stretch it for you. Okay, we'll make that a Tuesday. Who made the breakthrough of empirical knowledge of the natural world? So just supply me the name of the individual that did this. That's all. Like I said, I had the longer writing. Question 5. Okay, I told you to remember this one. I told you to match the name to the law. So if you paid attention to me, besides the reading, you got this. Who developed the law of gravity? So go ahead and take a minute on answering those. Okay. Okay. Hopefully everybody's doing well on that. Okay, I guess it's time for me to acquire the eraser. Okay. Okay. So repeating, who made the breakthrough of empirical knowledge of the natural world? Just give me the person's name. 5, who developed the law of gravity? I told you how to make the connection. All righty then, back to the material. We ended down here, arrest by the order of the Pope. Remember the house arrest of Galileo. So let's proceed. We're going to skip 410 because it's just a big, long thing on Isaac Newton. We need to learn about more people than him. So let's proceed on to 411. You possess the book. Okay, let's let that roll up a bit. The machine gets moody sometimes. All right. Were these condemnations justified? Condemnations means just out and out refusals and bad talking of those things. Most of the 17th century scientists consider themselves good Christians, so they had not abandoned their faith and made no attempt to rule a divine being out of the universe, which also means that they did not say, hey, there is no God, right? A devout means very strong and practicing Anglican Newton spent most of his later life embarked on religious speculations and obscure theological inquiries or questions. All right. So the faith doesn't seem to have left any of these early scientists, you know. Wow. Where now people grow up with the science and they have no faith whatsoever, unless a few have some kind of revelation. Descartes, like Copernicus before him, was a Catholic who saw no conflict between what he taught about the nature of the material world and what he believed about the spiritual one. Quite to the contrary, Descartes believed that his speculations only pointed more clearly to the existence of a divine intelligence in the universe. So that's very interesting. What is being said there with that gobbledygook of language? Again, I'm saying it's very interesting. Is this okay? Descartes had all this scientific speculations or questions and what have you. And instead of, again, like modern, let's say, scientists that say, well, all my studies of science just lead me farther away from the ever having the possible belief that there is a God. Descartes believed that his questions and journey pointed more clearly to the existence of a God, right? So very different, very interesting. You know? So continuing in the middle, but the church's truth, resting as it did on revelation rather than empirical data. So, and that's the thing with religion. It's non-tangible. It's something you feel. It's not something you can, you know, eat and then you have a feeling. You either you feel it or you don't. And if you don't, there's not a lot of proof, right? Because there's no photos of God, and he can't just appear if you said, hey, I believe in God, and here he is. And that's for all religions. And so it's not based on empirical data because you can't see, feel, or touch God. At first, only tangentially, but later more confrontationally by the facts revealed by science. Furthermore, science's truth had no access to grind for one party or another. So what that means is scientists at this time were just out to find truth. Whereas again, modern day scientists usually have an axe to grind, which means they want to go against religion and prove religion wrong, okay? But before, these people started as devout religious people and didn't lose their faith, but wanted extra proof, extra knowledge. So very interesting time, you know. Okay. Furthermore, science is truth. Oh God, like I said, no access to grind. It was not linked to politics. So there you go. Also not used as a political tool or to a social group's advantage or disadvantage. It was self-evident and could sometimes be used to benefit the ordinary person. For example, though its conversion to new technology, although the connections between science and technology were as yet almost entirely undeveloped, not like today. That's quite a different story you have there. Increasingly, educated people were beginning to wonder whether it was more useful to know if the Holy Eucharist should be given in two forms, or to know how digestion takes place in the stomach of some similar aspect of new physical science. That is, you know, funny. So what they mean there is that the Eucharist, if you're a Catholic, it's the, what they call the wafer. So they're trying to be silly and say, oh, you're going to be such a master of science that you're going to even ask, like, no, what is, let's ask about digestion of the Eucharist instead of the spiritual leaning of it. You know what I mean? So interesting. Continuing, science came to be seen as an alternative to theology or religion. In finding useful knowledge and applying it in society's multiple problems. So traditionally, people just used the Bible and religion to solve problems. But now they said, hey, I'm going to use science to solve problems. In this regard, two of the most important thinkers of the 17th century were the agnostic Dutch Jew Baruch Spinoza, which means did not believe in anything, and the pious Catholic Frenchman, which means very devout, Blaise Pascal. Spinoza was a great questioner who, after leaving Judaism, finally found some measure of peace by perceiving his God in all creation. His rejection of a personal deity, again, word for God, earned him a great deal of trouble, but his thoughts influenced generations. Pascal wrote his pensées, pan says thoughts, that's the meaning, to calm a troubled mind, and produced a work that has been considered one of the greatest of Christian consolations ever since. The fact that Pascal was highly suspect to the French clerical establishment only added to his later fame. Wow. Okay. The science of man. Until modern times, the natural sciences were regarded as a branch of philosophy rather than a separate intellectual discipline. But as a branch of philosophy, they had obtained some respectability. Already in the Renaissance, math and physics began to establish a place in the university curriculum. Their prestige was still relatively low, and they could not rival medicine or compete with medicine, law, or theology in attracting students, but their own rules of evidence and analysis were being formed slowly, step by step. As the mathematics-based sciences came to be accepted as sources of much theretofore unknown truth, the previous relation between natural science, see if I can lift this, and philosophy. Okay, so we go on. Right. Underwent a gradual but decisive reversal in thinking here. Philosophy, which had been the more inclusive discipline, encompassing science, now became for many a branch of science. In so much as an object of thought could not be measured, right? You think of something, but you can't measure it and weighed, it ceased or stopped to be worthy of close attention. Individuals thinking along these lines held that only what could be determined in its existence by the tools of science was reachable by the power of reason and useful to humans. They did not deny that other phenomena that were not measurable and not reachable by reason existed, but they insisted that these phenomena should only have a secondary place in the hierarchy or list of human value. So they should be, this religious feelings should be lower than the scientific areas where they felt you could prove things, measure things. Among those phenomena, of course, were, religious belief, artistic creativity. That's another thing. Let's say I'm artistic and all of a sudden I can paint this beautiful masterpiece, but I can't teach you how to do it. And I can't tell you how I'm able to do it because it comes from this feeling. Wonder is amazement, imagination, ethics, and political theory, to mention only a few. None of these could be measured and none could be brought under uniform and predictable laws, right? They can't. How can you explain exactly how you're feeling God's presence? You can't. How can you explain how you're able to paint a masterpiece? Can you teach it? No. Either you have the talent or you don't. So again, repeating, none of these could be measured and none could be brought under uniform and predictable laws. Or could they? Maybe some people thought they could. A body of thought gradually arose or came up that said that these phenomena too might be subject to law, analyzable through mathematical computations. That's interesting. I don't know how you do that. And comprehensible or understandable in the same way as physics. The science of man, not man as an anatomical construct or an example of biological systems, but as a thinker, political actor, and artist began to form. By the early 18th century, this science, which we now call social science, was competing with physical science for the attention of the educated classes. Now we're going to read the bottom part of 411. The Enlightenment. And again, when you're enlightened, that means you have some knowledge of which you didn't have before. So kind of like if you remember the Matrix and he offered him, what was it, the blue pill? He said, you'll have this knowledge afterwards, and it's an enlightenment. 18th century intellectual leaders saw no reason why what had been done in the natural science could not be attempted in the social sciences. They wanted to put history, politics, jurisprudence, and economics under the same logical senses that had been applied to math and physics. Spurred on by such hopes, the Enlightenment was born. Above all, the 18th century in Western Europe was distinguished from what had come before by the attitudes that educated persons exhibited or showed in the affairs of everyday life, the atmosphere of their mental life. Two key characteristics of the Enlightenment asserted or came forth themselves again and again: optimism and rationality. Okay. Optimism and rationality. Yes, sir. Make sure we got that right. Optimism and rationality. Here, optimism refers to the belief that change is possible and controllable in society at large, while rationality refers to the idea that the universe and all creatures within it, especially the humans, are comprehensible or understandable, predictable, you can predict what they do, and lawful, which means they follow the law. The commitment to a rational view of the universe usually embraced a similar commitment to secularism, that is, a downgrading or outright rejection of the importance of supernatural religion. Again, if you're secular, you don't have a faith. The Enlightenment preferred to see humanity as capable of creating its own moral code for its own benefit and in accord with the precepts of the rational mind. So in other words, they felt you don't need the Bible. It's specifically, you don't need the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet. They're like, no, we can make our own. We don't need one that supposedly came from a God that we cannot see or understand. That was their thinking. How did this translate to concrete activity, which means real activity? The ways of viewing the physical world that math and physics had introduced were now applied, or an attempt was made to apply them to the world's social, political, and that brings us to the bottom of 411. So, I got to go to the whiteboard. Get the pencil. Question 6. Okay, a long one, but again, you're just naming two people. So let me stretch it. Oops, I don't want to move it. There we go. It's a good twosies. Name two of the most important thinkers of the 17th century. So just give me the two names. Easy peasy. 7. Here's another long question, and you're just going to give me a list. Again, the longer the list, the better for you. It's a good practice for the the final. I'll change that a little. Okay, name the topics that the Enlightenment wanted to study with logic. Okay, we just talked about that, so that should be fresh in your mind. All right, so I'll give you a few to do that. Okay, you guys doing okay? Okay, let me go for the eraser. All right, repeating 6. Name two of the most important thinkers of the 17th century. So just choose two fellows. Okay. 7. Name the topics that the Enlightenment wanted to study with logic. So there's a list. It's not too long, but if you only do one compared to someone who does 3 or 4, you'll get less points on the final. Okay. All right, that's done. We'll share. We stopped here at the bottom to the world social, political, and that was for 11. So let's proceed to for 12. Moral aspects. If physicists could measure the weight of the Earth's atmosphere, and they now could, then why couldn't historians isolate the exact causes of cultural retardation and determine how to avoid them in the future? Why couldn't criminologists build a model prison and establish a regime that would turn out completely rehabilitated prisoners? I'll tell you why, because humans are unpredictable and you just can't. Why couldn't political scientists calibrate or measure various methods of selecting public officials to ensure that only the best were selected? Formative figures and basic ideas. Although the movement was truly international one, the two outstanding progenitors of the Enlightenment's ideas were the Englishmen Isaac Newton and John Locke. As we have already seen, Newton was the greatest scientific mind of his age. Locke was the leading mapper of the political path that England embarked on with the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Newton's greatest contribution to science, related to, but even more important than the law of gravity, was his insistence on rational, lawful principles in all operations of physical nature. He rejected supernatural causes as an explanation of the natural world. So anything supernatural, throw it out, according to Newton. Holding that because nature is rational, human society as a part of nature should be rational in its organization and function. To the top right, Locke was as much a psychologist as a political scientist. He set forth his view of the mind in the immensely influential Essay Concerning Human Understanding, 1690. Was anybody around in 1690 from my class? I don't think so. Maybe 1699, but not 1690. Here he said that the mind is a blank page until experience and environment write on it and mold it. Thus, human nature is dynamic and unfixed. It has been in the past and will be in the future, formed by external experience. This experience is capable of being controlled. Oh boy, how do you do that? So humans are not condemned to repeat endlessly the sin of Adam and the mistakes of the past. They can and must take charge of their destiny. They can perfect themselves. More than anything else, this faith in perfectibility is the distinguishing innovation of the Enlightenment. Wow, listen to that again. More than anything else, this faith is the faith is in perfectibility, is the distinguishing innovation of the Enlightenment. Okay. It's a lot of stuff there, right? For the previous 17 centuries, the Christian idea of guilt from the sin of Adam, okay, heavy stuff, as an insuperable barrier. So you can never beat it, because Christians will tell you you're born a sinner, right? Can't beat it. To human perfection, and had been the foundation stone of Western moral philosophy. Now the 18th century proposed to move the house off its foundation, which means the church, and erect it anew with a different science-based, I can't say religion, but belief. Progress, both moral and physical, was reachable and real. The study of history showed how far humans had come and how far they still had to go. The past was filled with error and blindness, okay? But it could be, must be learned so that it could light the way to a better future. Strong goals there, folks, strong goals. Okay. The reformers believed that those who profited from ignorance and prejudice controlled religious belief and used it as a tool everywhere to obscure or hide the truth. They took an especially harsh or strong view of the Roman Catholic clergy or priests, where the church had obtained a monopolistic position in the state and was the official church. The reformers believed that the inevitable corruption had made it a parasite that should be cast off as soon as possible and replaced with the freedom of conscience and worship. In the reformers' view, education was the salvation of humankind. It should be promoted at every opportunity, everywhere. Insofar as people were educated, they were good. The fully educated would be unerring seekers of the best that life held, defenders of the helpless, teachers of the misguided, and liberators of the oppressed. Again, very lofty goals. Most people fall short of those things. I have a question here before I can come back. Let me get this question out of the way, just one. I don't want to lump it all together. I've been reading a lot. Okay, pencil. So this is question 8 from what last part we've been reading. Make sure I get the spelling right. Again, just giving you a lot of identificators. I want you to identify, folks. And again, I'm using this big word here, progenitor, so make it easy for you to find the answer. So don't worry about, well, I'm confused. What does that actually mean? Use it to find the answer and you shall be set free. Okay, let me stretchy poo. Get question 8 out of the way. Okay, that's a good doozy. Who are the two outstanding progenitors of the Enlightenment? So once you look for those two people and you find this word, it will connect them and you will have your answer. So go ahead. Okay, you got that? Okay, let me go for the eraser. Okay, repeating. Who were the two outstanding progenitors of the Enlightenment? Look for this word, you'll find the answer. Okay, let's get back to the material. Okay. Okay, so we're down here at the Philosophes and their ideas. The Enlightenment was a view of life, a philosophy, and that meant it must have its philosophers, generically known by the French term philosophes. They included men and women of both thought and action, men and women, scientists and philosophers who were committed to the cause of reform. Despite their often intense personal differences, they were united in their desire for progress, by which they meant controlled changes. Okay, up on the top, several of the outstanding philosophers were French. Paris and secondarily London was the center of the Enlightenment's activity. So those are the two big cities. It was decidedly urban phenomenon, so city, not country. But the Philosophes kept in frequent touch with one another through a network of clubs and correspondence that covered the map of Europe. They included the Frenchman Voltaire, Baron Montesquieu, Denis Diderot, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and English and Scots David Hume, Adam Smith, Samuel Johnson, William Godwin, and Mary Wollstonecraft. You're not going to have to know the majority of these names, okay, just a few. The Germans, Joseph von Sonnenfels, Gotthold Lessing, and August Ludwig von Schlosser, and the Italians, Lodovico Muratori and Cesare Beccaria, but the list could be made as long as one wants. Wow, getting tired of these names. It's like my students. Here we go with including the Americans, like I told you earlier. The Americans, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams belong on this list as well. The Enlightenment had no territorial boundaries, although it was much narrower and shallower in Eastern Europe than in the West, and had much less impact on the public conduct of the government there. Chronologically, the earliest evidence of Enlightenment activity occurred in organized fashion dates from the 1730s. The period of most active endeavor ended with the French Revolution's political crises. The high point was in the 1770s and 1780s when various governments. Oh, we're at the end. How exciting. Isn't that great? From North America to Russia, experimented with, gave lip service to, which means they talked about it and supported it, or to fully adapt, which means they actually did it, one after another of the favorite ideas of the Philosophes. Beyond the commitment to reform, it is difficult to find a common denominator in these ideas because the Philosophes themselves are difficult to categorize. Interesting. Some of them were the first public atheists, which means we don't believe in God, but most were at least outward Christians. They didn't lose their faith, and some were very pious clergymen, so priests. Muratori, for example, was a priest. Most believed constitutional monarchy was the best form of government, which they still, king, whereas others were uncompromising believers in representative government, so voting, which later became like our United States president. Okay, so we're at the end of the readings, but I have 2 more questions. We got to round it out with at least 10 questions with all this reading. Okay, but easy peasy stuff. Okay. Okay, let me stretch this. Make it a nice twosie. Good. Name which European cities that were centers for the Philosophes. Again, I don't want my funny guys. It's Cape Town and San Francisco. They are not in Europe, and they were not around in the 17th. Cape Town was not around the 1700. San Francisco, maybe, but it did not belong to the United States at that time. Depends. I have to remember exactly when the Spanish got there. Okay, so don't be silly. Last question. We're done for the day. Uh-oh, let me get the spelling correct. Philosophers. Okay. Can we try to make this a onesie? We haven't had a onesie in a while. Oh, stretch. Good man. So list some famous philosophers of the time. We just went through this. The list was quite long. So list some. I don't expect you to list a lot, but if you list one and your classmate lists 3, you're going to get more points. Okay. So let me give you a few minutes to at least write these down. Okay, you're making your list there and talking about those 2 big famous cities, San Diego and Las Vegas, right? I hope not. Okay, so you get the eraser. 9, repeating, name which European cities that were centers of the Philosophes. There weren't that many cities, so don't get confused. There's only a few. 10, list some of the philosophers of the time. Just think of the big names and you'll be fine. Forget all the smaller ones. Okay. Let me stop share. There I am. Okay, so we're done with this week's work. Thanks for hanging in there. Good luck with the week. Stay safe. Wear your mask, get your vaccinations, and I shall talk to you the next week. Okay, thank you.